My cousin spread a lie that ruined my life. 9 years later, she finally told the truth. I was stirring my coffee in the dim light of my kitchen, the kind of suburban morning where the rain patters against the window like a persistent reminder of unfinished business, when my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin, Emily. Simple, unassuming. Can we talk? It's important. I hadn't seen her in years, not since the family gatherings turned into minefields after what happened. But something in those words tugged at the scar tissue I'd built around my heart, so I agreed to meet at the neutral ground of a coffee shop downtown, the one with the worn leather booths and the barista who always remembers my order, black with 2 sugars to cut the bitterness of life. As I drove there, navigating the slick roads lined with minivans dropping kids at school, my mind wandered to the fragments of our shared past. Childhood summers at Aunt Linda's house, where Emily and I would sneak cookies from the jar and whisper secrets under the quilts. Her, the golden child with perfect grades and that effortless charm. Me, the quieter one, always trying to keep up. But those memories soured 9 years ago, when everything shattered. I parked and walked in, the bell jingling like a false cheer. And there she was, older now, her hair streaked with gray that matched the overcast sky outside, nursing a latte with hands that trembled slightly as she waved me over. We exchanged the awkward pleasantries of estranged family. How's work? The kids? The weather? As I slid into the booth, my wet umbrella dripping onto the floor like tears I hadn't shed in ages. But her eyes, red-rimmed and avoiding mine, told me this wasn't small talk. "I have to tell you something," she said finally, her voice barely above the hum of the espresso machine, and my stomach knotted because I could sense the storm brewing, the kind that upends your carefully rebuilt life. She took a deep breath, fiddling with her napkin, tearing it into tiny shreds that piled up like the debris of our relationship. And then it came out in a rush. "That story I told about you back then, about you taking the money from Grandma's estate, it was a lie. I made it up because I was jealous, because you'd just gotten that promotion and the house, and I was struggling with debt after my divorce, and I thought if everyone believed you'd stolen it, they'd turn to me, help me instead." The words hit like a physical blow, my coffee cup slipping from my fingers to spill across the table, hot liquid soaking into my sleeve as the shock radiated through me, a raw, visceral pain that clawed at the old wounds I'd thought were healed. 9 years. 9 goddamn years of being the family pariah, the one whispered about at holidays I wasn't invited to, the one whose calls to my parents went unanswered for months until they thawed just enough to send birthday cards with generic messages, the one who lost friends because the rumors spread like wildfire through our tight-knit suburban circle, whispered at PTA meetings and soccer games where my son, then just 5, would come home asking why no one wanted to play with him anymore. I remembered the immediate fallout back then, the confrontation at the lawyer's office when the will was read, and Emily tearfully accused me of forging documents, her performance so convincing with those fabricated emails she'd shown everyone, leading to investigations that cleared me technically, but left the stain of doubt, costing me my job because my boss couldn't have that kind of drama, and worse, straining my marriage to the breaking point until Mark packed his bags one rainy night similar to this, saying he couldn't live with the uncertainty, leaving me to raise our boy alone in a house that echoed with absence. And now, here she was, confessing it all as if it were a minor oversight, her eyes pleading for understanding while I sat there, my chest tightening with a grief so profound it felt like drowning, the anger bubbling up hot and unfiltered, making my voice shake as I whispered, "Why now? After all this time, why tell me now?" She looked down, her own guilt etched in the lines around her mouth, admitting she'd been in therapy for years, wrestling with the weight of it, especially after seeing posts on my Facebook about my son's graduations and my slow climb back to stability as a freelance writer, working from home with Netflix humming in the background during late nights, and finally a diagnosis of her own, some anxiety disorder, that made her realize the destruction she'd wrought. The raw pain surged through me, a mix of betrayal renewed and disbelief that she'd carried the secret while I pieced together a life from the ruins, attending single-parent support groups and therapy sessions where I'd unpack the guilt I'd internalized, wondering if maybe I had done something to deserve it. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the tile floor, grabbing my coat as the immediate fallout crashed over us, the barista glancing our way, customers murmuring, and I stormed out into the rain, my phone already buzzing with her apologetic texts as I drove home in a blur, tears mixing with the water on my windshield, the shock settling into a bone-deep ache that promised sleepless nights ahead, wondering how to even begin processing this truth that both freed and imprisoned me anew, the family ties I'd mourned, now dangling like a frayed lifeline I wasn't sure I wanted to grasp. I drove home through the downpour with the wipers slapping furiously, each swipe barely keeping up with the tears blurring my vision, the confession replaying in merciless loops. Emily's trembling voice admitting she'd fabricated the theft accusation out of jealousy, the way her napkin had disintegrated under her fingers like our childhood bond, and underneath the shock, a hollow rage settled in my chest, cold and heavy as wet concrete. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house lights were already on, warm yellow spilling onto the wet flagstones, and I sat in the car for long minutes, listening to the rain drum on the roof, trying to decide whether to tell Mark tonight or let the truth fester alone a little longer. We'd been divorced for 6 years now, but still co-parented, with the careful politeness of people who once loved each other fiercely, sharing custody of our 14-year-old son, Ethan, texting about soccer schedules and orthodontist appointments, occasionally lingering over coffee drop-offs to talk about nothing important, because the important things hurt too much. Inside, the smell of takeout pizza greeted me. Pepperoni, Ethan's favorite, and I found him sprawled on the couch with his headphones on, scrolling through whatever game clips teenagers obsess over these days, barely glancing up as I dropped my keys on the counter with a clatter that made him finally look. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, pulling one earbud out, his voice casual but his eyes sharp, the way they get when he senses something's wrong. And I managed a thin smile, said I was just tired from the rain and the drive, then retreated to the kitchen to pour a glass of the cheap red I keep for nights like this. Mark arrived at 7 sharp for his Tuesday dinner night, shaking water from his jacket, kissing Ethan on the top of the head before noticing my face, puffy eyes, the way I couldn't quite meet his gaze, and he paused in the doorway, concern flickering across features I still knew better than my own. We ate in near silence at first, the three of us around the scratched oak table that had survived the divorce, Ethan chattering about a science project involving baking soda volcanoes, while Mark and I exchanged glances loaded with years of unspoken history. After Ethan cleared his plate and disappeared upstairs to finish homework, Mark stayed, rinsing plates at the sink the way he always did when he wanted to talk without making it obvious. I waited until the dishwasher hummed to life, then said it flat out, voice low so Ethan wouldn't hear. Emily admitted it. The whole thing, the money, the emails, everything, was a lie she started because she was jealous. The words hung there, and Mark turned slowly, drying his hands on a dish towel, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker, a slow dawning fury that mirrored mine, but carried its own flavor of guilt because back then he'd believed her just enough to doubt me, to ask questions that felt like accusations, to eventually walk out when the uncertainty became unbearable. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he leaned against the counter, arms crossed, staring at the floor tiles we'd chosen together 12 years ago, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. "Jesus, Sarah," he breathed, the old endearment slipping out like a reflex, and I felt the first crack in the dam I'd built around my heart. Anger at him, too, for leaving, for not fighting harder, for believing I could ever steal from our own grandmother. But mostly, exhaustion, bone deep and familiar. We moved to the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch where we used to watch Netflix marathons, the space between us vast yet intimate in its familiarity, and I told him every detail of the coffee shop meeting, the way Emily's confession had sounded rehearsed yet raw, how she'd mentioned therapy and seeing my life rebuild on social media, the small, pathetic pride she took in my resilience, as if it excused her. Mark listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, fingers drumming against his knee the way he does when he's processing something too big for words. And when I finished, he rubbed his face hard, exhaling a shaky breath. "I should have known," he said quietly. "I should have trusted you more. I let the doubt win because it was easier than fighting the whole family." The admission landed like a stone in still water, rippling through me. Grief for what we'd lost, a flicker of vindication, and beneath it all, the old ache of loving someone who'd once chosen to walk away. We talked until past midnight, voices low, circling the same wounds without resolution, him apologizing again for the nights he'd spent sleeping on his brother's couch while I cried myself to sleep in our bed, me admitting I'd never fully forgiven him for doubting me even after the investigation cleared my name. At some point, Ethan padded downstairs for water, saw us sitting there in the dim lamplight, and froze. He'd been too young to understand the full scope back then, only that suddenly Grandma stopped coming over, cousins didn't invite him to birthday parties, and his dad moved out. But he was old enough now to read the tension. "Everything okay?" he asked again, softer this time, and we both forced smiles, told him yes, just grown-up stuff, go back to bed. When he was gone, Mark stood, shrugged into his jacket, hesitated at the door. "I don't know what happens next, but I'm glad she finally told you. You deserved the truth years ago." He left then, the front door clicking shut behind him, and I locked it, turned off the lights, climbed the stairs past Ethan's closed door where a strip of blue LED light glowed under the crack, and collapsed onto my bed still in my damped clothes. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay staring at the ceiling fan's slow rotation, replaying every moment of betrayal and every small kindness since. Mark showing up for every parent-teacher conference, Ethan hugging me extra tight on rough days, the freelance gigs that eventually steadied into a modest living, and felt the first faint stirrings of something terrifying, the possibility that truth, even 9 years late, might not destroy what was left, but could, against all odds, begin to mend it. The rain kept falling outside, steady and unhurried, washing the streets clean while I waited for dawn, heart bruised but no longer entirely closed. The next morning arrived gray and sluggish, the kind of Wednesday where the alarm feels like an intrusion and the coffee tastes like regret even before the first sip. I woke with a headache that pulsed behind my eyes, remnants of last night's long talk with Mark and the restless hours that followed, my mind replaying Emily's confession in fragments, jealousy, debt, the deliberate choice to destroy my reputation rather than ask for help. Ethan was already up, moving quietly through the routine we'd perfected over years of single-parent mornings. Cereal bowl clinking in the sink, backpack zipped, sneakers tied with the double knots he still insisted on at 14. He caught me staring into my mug at the kitchen island and paused, backpack slung over one shoulder. "You're doing that thing again," he said, voice careful, not quite accusing. "The quiet staring thing, like when Dad first moved out." I set the mug down harder than I meant to, the ceramic ringing against granite, and forced myself to meet his eyes, those same hazel ones Mark used to look at me with before everything fractured. Telling him felt impossible. He'd been shielded from the worst of the family fallout back then, too young to grasp why Grandma's funeral was the last time we saw most of our relatives, why birthday cards arrived late or not at all, why I'd cried in the car after dropping him at school more times than I could count. But he wasn't a little boy anymore, and lies of omission had their own weight. I took a breath, sat him down at the table, despite the school bus due in 15 minutes, and told him the bare bones. That Aunt Emily had admitted she'd lied about me stealing money from great-grandma's estate years ago, that it was never true, that the rumor had cost us a lot, friends, trust, even his dad for a while. His face went still, the way it does when he's processing something too big. Then he asked the question that cut deepest. "So all those years people thought you were a thief? It was just her making stuff up?" I nodded, throat tight, and watched shame and anger chase each other across his features. Shame for the times he'd wondered if maybe there was truth to the whispers he'd overheard at family events we no longer attended. Anger at a cousin he barely remembered, who'd shaped his childhood by erasing pieces of it. He didn't cry. Instead, he stood, hugged me fiercely enough that I felt his heartbeat against my collarbone, muttered, "I'm glad she finally said it," then grabbed his backpack and left for the bus without another word, leaving me alone with the echo of his footsteps and the sudden, fierce need to protect what little normalcy we'd rebuilt. The rest of the day passed in a fog of emails and deadlines, freelance copywriting for a local real estate firm, the kind of work that pays the mortgage but rarely fills the quiet hours, until my phone lit up with a call from my mother. She hadn't called in weeks, our conversations reduced to texts about holidays and vague check-ins, the distance between us still measured in the years she'd believed Emily's story over mine. Her voice was thin, hesitant. "Emily called me this morning. She told me what she told you." Silence stretched, heavy with everything we'd never said. I waited, letting her feel the weight of it. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, the words cracking. "I should have fought harder for you. I was scared, of being wrong, of losing her too, of the whole family splitting apart. I chose wrong." Hearing her admit it didn't erase the hurt, but it loosened something knotted inside me, a small release of pressure I hadn't realized I was still carrying. We talked for almost an hour, awkward, halting, circling the old pain without fully touching it yet, her confessing she'd cried after Emily's call, that she'd spent years justifying her silence to herself, me admitting I'd stopped expecting apologies because expecting anything hurt too much. By the end, she asked if she could come over Saturday, just her, no big family production, and I said yes before I could second-guess it, surprising us both. After we hung up, I sat on the couch staring at the blank television screen, phone still warm in my hand, and felt the first tentative boundary take shape. I would hear them out, one at a time if necessary, but I would not pretend the damage hadn't happened. No more swallowing hurt to keep the peace. When Mark texted later, "How are you holding up?" I replied honestly, "Talking to Mom tomorrow, Ethan knows. It's messy, but maybe necessary." His response came quickly. "Want me there?" I hesitated, thumbs hovering, then typed, "Yes, for Ethan mostly, but also for me." He sent back a simple thumbs-up emoji and nothing else, the restraint so like him it almost made me smile. That night, Ethan and I ordered Thai takeout, the cardboard containers spreading across the coffee table, while we watched half an episode of some sitcom neither of us really paid attention to. Halfway through, he paused it, looked at me sideways, and said, "I don't want to see Aunt Emily yet. Maybe ever. But if you do, I'll be okay with it, as long as you're okay." His protectiveness, the reversal of roles after so many years of me shielding him, brought a lump in my throat I had to swallow hard against. I reached over, squeezed his hand, felt the calluses from guitar strings he'd started playing last year, and promised I wouldn't rush anything. We finished the episode in companionable quiet, rain still tapping at the windows like it had something more to say, and when he went upstairs to bed, I stayed on the couch a while longer, scrolling through old family photos on my phone, the ones I'd kept hidden in a private album because looking at them used to hurt too much. Emily smiling at my wedding, arms around me, Grandma holding baby Ethan, all of us at the lake house before jealousy turned into sabotage. I didn't delete them. Instead, I saved one, a candid of Emily and me laughing on the dock, sun in our hair, and closed the app. Boundaries, I reminded myself. Truth first, then maybe, slowly, forgiveness, but only if it felt earned. The house settled around me, creaks and sighs of an old suburban home carrying on despite everything, and for the first time in 9 years, the silence didn't feel entirely lonely. Saturday dawned clearer than the week had any right to. Sunlight slicing through the blinds in sharp, optimistic stripes across the kitchen floor, while I measured coffee grounds with hands that still felt unsteady, the anticipation of my mother's visit sitting like a stone in my stomach. Ethan had asked to spend the day at his friend's house. Video games, pizza, the kind of normal teenage escape I encouraged because he deserved it after the bomb I dropped midweek, and Mark had offered to pick him up afterward, giving me the afternoon alone to navigate whatever came next without an audience. I'd spent the days since Emily's confession setting quiet rules for myself. No rushing to absolve anyone, no pretending the hurt had an expiration date, no letting guilt-tripping or tears shortcut the work of rebuilding trust, if it could be rebuilt at all. When the doorbell rang at 11, I opened it to find my mother standing there in her navy cardigan, the one she'd worn to every family gathering since I could remember, holding a bakery box of cinnamon rolls like a peace offering, and looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, the lines around her eyes deeper, her shoulders curved inward as if bracing for rejection. We didn't hug right away. Instead, I stepped aside, let her in, watched her take off her shoes with the same careful precision she'd always used, then led her to the living room, where the couch still held the faint indent from where Mark and I had sat talking until dawn earlier in the week. She set the box on the coffee table, sat on the edge of the cushion like she might need to bolt, and for a long minute, neither of us spoke, the tick of the wall clock measuring the distance we'd let grow between us. "I brought your favorite," she said finally, gesturing at the rolls, voice thin. "I know it doesn't fix anything." I nodded, poured us both coffee, black for her, cream for me, and sat across from her in the armchair, knees almost touching, close enough to see the tremor in her fingers when she lifted the mug. She started talking then, halting at first, then in a rush that felt like it had been dammed up for years. How Emily had come to her in tears after the estate was settled, showing those doctored screenshots, sobbing about how betrayed she felt that I'd taken what should have been shared. How my mother had wanted to believe her daughter-in-law's side of the family could never do such a thing, but doubt had crept in anyway, fed by Emily's performance and her own fear of confrontation. She admitted she'd chosen the path of least resistance, distance from me rather than challenging Emily, because keeping the larger family intact felt safer than risking another fracture. Each word landed like small, precise cuts. I let them, didn't interrupt, just sipped my coffee and watched the steam rise between us while anger and sorrow wrestled inside my chest. When she finished, she looked at me with eyes that were wet and pleading. "I failed you," she said simply. "I should have asked questions. I should have stood by you." I set my mug down, felt the old urge to comfort her rise, and pushed it back down. "Yes," I said, voice steady despite the shake in my hands. "You did." The honesty hung there, raw and unsoftened, and she flinched but didn't look away. We sat in that discomfort for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the cinnamon scent from the unopened box filling the room like an irony neither of us acknowledged. Eventually, I spoke again, laying out the boundaries I'd rehearsed in my head during sleepless nights. I needed time. Real time, not weeks, but months, maybe years, before I could consider family dinners or holidays together. Any contact with Emily would happen only if and when I initiated it. No more excuses or explanations from third parties. If she wanted a relationship with me and Ethan, it would be built on consistency, not grand gestures. She listened without arguing, nodding slowly, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll wait as long as it takes. I just want you to know I'm here when you're ready." Before she left, she hugged me, tentative, brief, and I let her, felt the familiar shape of her shoulders under my arms, the scent of her lavender soap the same as always, and something in me loosened just a fraction. Not forgiveness yet, but the possibility that one day it might not feel impossible. After she drove away, I texted Mark. She came. It was hard, but I said what I needed to. He replied almost immediately, "Proud of you. Need anything?" I stared at the screen, thumbs hovering, then typed, "Actually, yes. Could you come over tonight? Just to talk. No Ethan pressure." He sent back, "I'll be there at 7. Bring wine?" I almost laughed, the normalcy of it after everything, and answered, "Red, the cheap kind we used to like." The rest of the afternoon stretched empty and strangely peaceful. I worked on a client project with the windows open, spring air drifting in, ordered groceries online for the week ahead, folded laundry while a podcast murmured in the background about forgiveness and neuroplasticity, concepts that suddenly felt less abstract. When Mark arrived that evening, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon from the rolls I'd finally warmed and split between us, and we sat on the back porch under the string lights Ethan had hung last summer, glasses of Merlot in hand, watching the sky shift from blue to indigo. I told him about the conversation with my mother, the boundaries I'd set, the way saying them out loud had made them real. He listened, asked quiet questions. How did it feel? What do you need from me now? And when I admitted I was scared of letting anyone close again, he reached over, covered my hand for just a second, warm and steady, then let go without making it a moment. "You don't have to decide everything tonight, or this year, just one step at a time." We talked until the bottle was empty and the night air turned cool, about Ethan's latest guitar obsession, my freelance rhythm finally feeling sustainable, his own quiet regrets from those early post-divorce years. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door, looked back at me, framed in the kitchen light. "I'm glad you asked me to come," he said softly. means something. I nodded, throat tight, and watched his taillights disappear down the street before locking up, climbing the stairs past Ethan's empty room — he'd texted he was staying over at his friend's house — and slipping into bed with the faint taste of wine still on my tongue. Lying there in the dark, I felt the slow, deliberate choice to take space, not isolation, but deliberate distance from the chaos of family expectation, and for the first time since Emily's text, it didn't feel like running away. It felt like choosing myself, carefully, one quiet boundary at a time, while the house breathed around me, and somewhere far off, a train whistle carried through the night like a reminder that life keeps moving, even when we're still figuring out how to step forward. The weeks after my mother's visit blurred into a careful routine of small, deliberate steps. Morning coffee measured exactly the same way each day, school drop-offs where Ethan and I exchanged quick updates about his day instead of the heavy silence that used to follow bad news, freelance deadlines met with a focus that felt almost like armor. And underneath it all, the truth of Emily's confession sat like an uninvited guest in every quiet moment, demanding I decide what to do with it. I started individual therapy again the first Tuesday in May, booking the same therapist I'd seen sporadically after the divorce, Dr. Nguyen, whose office smelled faintly of lemongrass from the diffuser she kept on the side table, and whose calm, unhurried questions had once helped me survive the worst of the single-parent fog. The first session I spent mostly crying, the kind of ugly, hiccuping sobs I hadn't allowed myself in years, describing the coffee shop meeting in halting detail while she nodded and passed tissues without comment. "You're allowed to feel everything at once," she said when I finally ran out of words. Anger at Emily, grief for the lost years, even relief that the story wasn't true. None of it cancels the others out. That permission to hold contradiction without forcing resolution cracked something open. I left the session lighter, not healed, but less afraid of the tangle inside me. Over the next 6 weeks, I went every Tuesday, sitting in the same chair by the window that looked out on a strip mall parking lot where people hurried in and out of a dry cleaner and a nail salon, talking about the ways betrayal reshapes trust, not just with others, but with your own judgment. I told her how I'd second-guessed every friendship since, how I still braced for rejection when someone was kind too quickly, how I'd kept Mark at a polite distance even after he started showing up more consistently for Ethan, because letting him closer felt like risking the same doubt all over again. Dr. Nguyen listened, asked gentle questions about what safety would look like now, and slowly I began experimenting with small acts of vulnerability that felt enormous, texting my mother photos of Ethan's latest guitar recital instead of waiting for her to ask, replying to Mark's casual "how's the week going" messages with more than one-word answers, even leaving a voice memo for my sister, Emily's older sister, who'd stayed mostly neutral back then, saying I wasn't ready to talk yet, but that I appreciated her not taking sides publicly when everything blew up. Each one left me shaky afterward, heart racing as if I'd run a mile, but also strangely steadier, proof that reaching out didn't always end in pain. One evening in early June, after a particularly draining session where we'd unpacked the shame I'd carried for being the problem in the family narrative, I came home to find Mark's car in the driveway. He'd texted earlier that Ethan had forgotten his cleats for practice, and he'd swung by to drop them off. I expected him to leave quickly, he usually did, but he lingered in the kitchen, leaning against the counter while I unloaded groceries, watching me with that quiet attentiveness he'd always had when he sensed I was fraying. "Therapy today?" he asked, not prying, just noticing the red-rimmed eyes I hadn't quite hidden. I nodded, set the milk in the fridge, then surprised myself by saying, "Yeah, it's helping, more than I thought it would." He didn't push. Instead, he asked what I was making for dinner. Nothing fancy, just sheet pan chicken and vegetables, and offered to stay and chop onions if I wanted company. I hesitated only a second before handing him the knife, and we worked side by side in the small kitchen the way we used to on Sunday afternoons before life fractured, the sizzle of oil in the pan and the rhythmic chop of vegetables filling the silence comfortably instead of tensely. Ethan burst in from practice an hour later, sweaty and starving, and the three of us ate at the table with actual conversation. School gossip, a funny story from Mark's job at the engineering firm, my cautious mention of a new client who wanted a whole website rewrite, and for the first time since the confession, the air between us didn't feel mined with old hurts. After Ethan cleared the plates and disappeared to shower, Mark helped load the dishwasher, then paused at the sink, drying his hands slowly. "I've been thinking about starting therapy too," he said, voice low. "Not couples, we're not there, and maybe never will be, but individual. I've got stuff to unpack from back then, ways I failed you that I still carry." That admission hung between us, simple and unguarded, and I felt a tentative warmth spread through the cold places I'd guarded so long. "That's good," I said softly. "I'm glad." He nodded, met my eyes for a long beat, then reached out, not to hold my hand, but to brush a stray crumb from my sleeve, a small, careful touch that lingered just long enough to register as kindness rather than claim. When he left that night, he hugged Ethan at the door, then turned to me and said, "Text me if you need anything, even if it's just to vent about therapy homework." I smiled, small, real, and watched him drive away under the streetlights, the taillights fading down the quiet suburban block. Later, alone in bed with the ceiling fan steering warm air, I opened my phone to the family group chat I'd muted years ago, scrolled past the unread messages, birthday wishes, holiday photos I'd never responded to, and typed a single line to my mother. Therapy's helping. Maybe coffee next week? Just us? I hit send before doubt could stop me, then turned off the screen and let the darkness settle. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of Ethan's music through the wall, and for the first time in 9 years, the future didn't feel like something to survive, but something I might, slowly, choose to step into. One honest conversation, one small risk, one quiet night at a time. The first joint session with Mark happened on a humid Thursday in late July, the kind of summer evening where the air clings to your skin and cicadas scream from every tree-lined street in the neighborhood. I'd suggested it almost casually during one of our post-dinner porch talks, saying maybe it was time to stop circling each other with polite updates about Ethan and actually name the things we'd both been carrying since Emily's confession cracked everything open again. He'd agreed without hesitation, too quickly almost as if he'd been waiting for permission, and we found a couples therapist recommended by Dr. Nguyen, a woman named Dr. Patel, whose office was in a converted Victorian house downtown with soft gray walls, plants in every corner, and a strict no phones policy that forced us to sit with each other undistracted for the full 50 minutes. We arrived separately, me parking 2 blocks away to give myself time to breathe, him already there when I walked in, standing awkwardly in the waiting room with his hands in his pockets like he used to before big conversations. Dr. Patel greeted us with quiet warmth, no small talk, just an invitation to sit on opposite ends of the L-shaped sofa and start wherever felt safest. I went first because the silence felt heavier on me. I described the coffee shop moment in more detail than I'd managed in individual therapy, the way Emily's voice had cracked on jealous, how the spilled latte had soaked my sleeve like an accusation, and then the slower burn of realizing how deeply her lie had lodged in our marriage, turning every disagreement into evidence I might be untrustworthy, every late night at work into suspicion. Mark listened with his elbows on his knees, head bowed, and when it was his turn, he spoke so quietly I had to lean forward to hear. He admitted he'd let the rumor poison him gradually, that he'd started questioning my character in small ways. Why hadn't I fought harder against the accusation? Why did I seem so calm when everyone else was outraged? Because anger at me was easier than anger at the family he'd married into, easier than admitting he felt powerless. I chose doubt over loyalty, he said, voice rough, because doubt let me leave without feeling like the villain. The words landed between us like stones dropped in shallow water, rippling out to touch every memory we shared. The night he packed his suitcase while Ethan slept upstairs, the awkward handoffs in the driveway for years afterward, the way we'd both pretended the hurt had faded when really it had just gone quiet. Dr. Patel asked what we each needed to feel safe moving forward, and I surprised myself by saying transparency. Not constant check-ins or location sharing, but no more secrets about feelings. No more swallowing hard truths to avoid conflict. If something hurt, we named it, even if the naming felt clumsy. Mark nodded, then added his own. Forgiveness wasn't a single event, but proof over time. Small consistencies he could show me. Showing up, listening without defending, owning his part without waiting for me to prompt him. We didn't hold hands that first session. The space between us on the couch stayed wide. But when Dr. Patel asked us to try something small before the next appointment, spend 10 minutes a day sharing one honest feeling, no fixing, no advice, just listening, we both agreed without protest. The drive home felt different. Windows down, warm air rushing in, radio off. I didn't turn on music because the quiet didn't feel empty anymore. Over the next weeks, we followed through on the homework in fits and starts. Some nights it was easy, sitting on the back steps after Ethan went to bed, me admitting I still flinched when family texts came in, him confessing he sometimes replayed old arguments in his head, wondering if he'd stayed, would things have been different. Other nights, one of us was too tired or too raw, and we'd text instead. I'm scared this will all fall apart again. Or, I miss how we used to laugh at nothing. The messages weren't romantic, they were honest, stripped down, and each one felt like laying another brick in a wall we were rebuilding together instead of against each other. One evening in early August, Ethan had a late soccer game, and afterward, the three of us stopped for ice cream at the stand near the park, the one with the sticky picnic tables and the neon sign that flickered when it got too hot. We sat under strings of bulbs while Ethan devoured his mint chip and told us about a new play he'd learned, and when he ran off to the playground to burn off the sugar rush, Mark and I stayed at the table, cones melting in the heat. Without planning it, I reached across and rested my hand, palm up, on the scarred wood. He looked at it for a long second, then placed his own over mine, not gripping, just resting, fingers loose, warm from the summer night. We didn't speak right away, we just sat there, hands touching, watching Ethan swing higher and higher while moths batted against the lights. The contact wasn't electric or dramatic, it was ordinary, almost mundane, yet it carried the weight of 9 years of distance and the tentative courage it took to close even that small gap. When Ethan called us over to watch him do a trick on the monkey bars, we stood together, hands separating naturally as we walked, but the memory of that touch lingered like a promise we hadn't yet voiced. Driving home later, Ethan asleep in the back seat, Mark glanced at me from the passenger side, he'd insisted I drive because my car had better AC, and said quietly, "That felt good tonight. Not perfect, but good. I nodded, eyes on the road, streetlights sliding across the windshield. I whispered, yeah, it did. We didn't kiss goodnight when he left. We didn't need to yet. Instead, he hugged me at the door, brief, firm, the way you hug someone you're learning to trust again, and drove away into the humid dark. I stood on the porch for a moment longer, listening to crickets and distant traffic, feeling the slow shift inside me. Not full forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of belief that closeness could return without erasing the scars, that we could name the deeper issues, doubt, fear, the ways we'd both chosen safety over vulnerability, and still find our way back to the same room, the same hand, the same quiet hope that maybe, after everything, love didn't have to end in ruin, but could, painstakingly, learn to endure. Labor Day weekend arrived with the first real hint of autumn in the air. Cooler mornings, leaves just starting to turn gold at the edges, and I suggested the trip almost without thinking, the words slipping out over breakfast while Ethan shoveled cereal and Mark lingered at the kitchen island, nursing his second coffee after dropping off a forgotten backpack the night before. What if we went to the lake house? I said, staring into my mug as if the idea were casual instead of seismic. The place had belonged to Grandma, the one whose estate had sparked the whole disaster. After she passed, the family had agreed to keep it in a trust for shared use, but I hadn't set foot there since the summer before everything imploded, when Emily and I still traded sunscreen and inside jokes on the dock. Mark looked up sharply. Ethan paused mid-bite, and the kitchen went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. You sure? Mark asked, voice careful, searching my face for cracks. I wasn't entirely sure. No one could be after 9 years of avoidance. But therapy had been nudging me toward exposure, not endless circling, and the thought of reclaiming a place that had once meant uncomplicated summers felt like the next necessary risk. Ethan surprised us both by saying, I'd go. I remember the rope swing. And s'mores. His casual agreement tipped the scale. We booked the weekend, told my mother we'd be using the house so she could spread the word without making it an invitation, packed lightly, swimsuits that might not even get used, Ethan's guitar, board games we hadn't touched in years, and drove the 3 hours north on Friday afternoon with the windows down, radio tuned to an oldies station that played songs we all knew the words to without admitting it. The lake house looked smaller than I remembered, weathered gray siding and a sagging porch screened by overgrown hydrangeas, but the key still turned in the lock the same way, the familiar smell of pine and dust and faint mildew rushing out to meet us like an old relative who doesn't quite know what to say. We moved in slowly, claiming rooms, Ethan upstairs in the loft with the bunk beds, Mark and I taking separate bedrooms on the main floor without discussion, the unspoken boundaries still necessary even as the air between us had softened. The first evening, we grilled burgers on the rusty charcoal kettle, ate on the deck overlooking water that reflected the sunset in long orange streaks, and talked about nothing heavier than Ethan's upcoming freshman year and whether the dock needed new boards. After dinner, Ethan wandered down to the water with a flashlight, skipping stones while fireflies blinked on and off like hesitant signals, and Mark and I stayed on the deck with mugs of decaf, the night settling around us in cricket song and distant loon calls. This feels strange, I admitted, voice low, being here without the old noise in my head. He nodded, elbows on the railing. I keep waiting for the other shoe, like if we relax too much, something will remind us why we stopped coming. We sat with that honesty until the air chilled, then went inside to find Ethan strumming chords on the couch, the acoustic notes filling the living room the way music used to when family filled every corner. Saturday tested us. Rain moved in mid-morning, gray sheets drumming on the metal roof, trapping us indoors with board games and half-finished puzzles. Tensions surfaced in small ways, Mark suggesting we call my mother to check in, me snapping that I wasn't ready for her voice in this space yet, Ethan retreating to the loft when our tones sharpened. But instead of letting the friction harden, we paused. I made hot chocolate, Mark pulled out an old photo album from the bookshelf, and we sat on the rug together flipping pages, Grandma laughing at the grill, Emily and me at 10 with matching braids and missing teeth, my wedding day with Mark's arm around my waist and Ethan a bump under my dress. We didn't romanticize. We named the ache, too. The way the pictures stopped after a certain point. The blank years where no one documented anything because documenting hurt. Ethan asked quiet questions. Why did Aunt Emily do it? Did you ever think about forgiving her? And we answered as best we could. No sugarcoating, just the truth that jealousy can twist people into shapes they don't recognize. That forgiveness isn't a switch, but a slow thawing. By afternoon, the rain eased to drizzle. We walked the muddy path to the dock anyway, shoes squelching, Ethan running ahead to test the rope swing even though the water was too cold for swimming. Mark and I hung back, arms brushing occasionally as we navigated roots, and when we reached the end of the dock, he stopped, looked out at the lake rippling under gray sky, and said, I'm sorry I didn't stay to fight for us back then. I should have. I swallowed, felt the old grief rise and then recede, replaced by something quieter. I'm sorry I shut down so hard afterward. I made it impossible for you to come back. We stood there, wind tugging at our jackets, and then, without fanfare, he reached for my hand, fingers threading through mine, cold from the air but warm where our palms met. I didn't pull away. Instead, I squeezed back, just enough to say I felt it too, the tentative bridge being rebuilt plank by plank. Ethan called us over, laughing as he swung out and dropped into the shallows with a splash that echoed across the water, and we watched him surface grinning, hair plastered, beckoning us closer.
We didn't join him in the water, but we sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling, hands still linked between us, the three of us together in a way that felt new and fragile and real. That night, we built a fire in the stone pit outside, despite the lingering damp, roasted marshmallows until they caught flame, and talked until the logs burned low. About college visits Ethan was nervous about my freelance work picking up enough to consider hiring help, and about Mark's promotion that meant more travel, but also more stability. When Ethan finally yawned and headed inside, Mark and I stayed by the dying embers, shoulders touching now, the heat of the fire on our faces, and the cooler night at our backs. He turned to me, eyes reflecting the glow, and whispered, "I don't know what we are yet, but I know I want to keep finding out." I nodded, leaned my head against his shoulder for the first time in years, felt him exhale like he'd been holding the breath since he left. We didn't kiss, not yet, but the closeness carried its own intimacy, scarred and honest, the kind that doesn't pretend the past didn't happen, but refuses to let it dictate the future. Driving home Sunday afternoon with Ethan asleep in the back, the lake house shrinking in the rearview mirror, I glanced at Mark in the passenger seat, profile calm, hand resting near mine on the console, and felt the slow, hard-earned shift, not a return to what was, but the beginning of something stronger because it had been tested, broken, and chosen again, one quiet, rain-soaked weekend at a time.
1 year to the day since Emily's text lit up my phone in that rainy kitchen, I woke to sunlight slanting through half-open blinds. The kind of clear September morning that makes the suburban streets look freshly washed, leaves just beginning to crisp at the edges, and the air carrying the faint promise of wood smoke from someone's early fireplace. The house smelled of coffee already. Mark had stayed over last night after we'd driven Ethan back from his first college visit, the three of us too wired from campus tours and dorm questions to part ways immediately. So I padded downstairs in socks to find him at the stove flipping pancakes, sleeves rolled to his elbows, humming something off-key that might have been an old song we used to sing on road trips. Ethan was still asleep upstairs, exhausted from the whirlwind weekend, but the quiet felt companionable rather than empty, the kind of silence that holds people together instead of pushing them apart. I poured coffee, black with 2 sugars, the way I'd taken it since the days when bitterness needed countering, and leaned against the counter watching Mark work, noticing the small changes time and therapy had etched. The gray threading through his hair at the temples, the easier set of his shoulders, the way he glanced over with a half smile that said he knew exactly what day it was without me having to say it. We didn't speak right away. Instead, he slid a plate toward me, golden pancakes stacked with a pat of butter melting into syrup rivers, and we ate standing up at the island the way we used to on rushed mornings before school runs and soccer practices, only now there was no hurry, no undercurrent of unresolved hurt waiting to surface. After the plates were cleared and the dishwasher started its low rumble, Mark reached into the junk drawer, the one that still held old keys, rubber bands, a stray guitar pick, and pulled out a small envelope, plain white, no address, just my name in his careful handwriting. "I wrote this last night," he said, voice steady but soft. "After you fell asleep. I didn't want to say it in the moment and make it feel performative, but I wanted you to have it today." I took it, felt the weight of folded paper inside, and opened it slowly while he watched, coffee mug cradled in both hands like an anchor. The note was short, ink slightly smudged where his thumb had rested too long on one line. "Sarah, 1 year ago, I didn't know if we'd ever sit in the same room without the past crowding in. Today, I'm grateful we do. Grateful for the hard conversations, the nights one of us wanted to walk out but stayed, the small proofs we've given each other that trust can be rebuilt when both people choose to show up. I'm not asking for promises we can't keep yet. I'm just saying I love the life we're making now, even with the scars. And I love you, still. Differently, but no less. Mark." I read it twice, throat tight, then folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket next to my phone, where it would stay close the rest of the day. "Thank you," I whispered, stepping into the space between us. He set his mug down and pulled me against him, arms wrapping around my shoulders the way they used to after long days. Only now the embrace carried 9 years of distance and the deliberate choice to cross it again. We stood like that until Ethan's footsteps thumped down the stairs, sleepy voice calling, "Is that pancakes I smell?" breaking the moment without shattering it. The day unfolded in ordinary pieces that felt miraculous in their normalcy. Ethan recounting every detail of the college tour over second helpings, Mark teasing him about dorm food while I snapped photos on my phone to send to my mother, who now texted regularly, short messages about recipes or weather that we answered without the old wariness. In the afternoon, we drove to the park near the house, the one with the wide paths and the pond where ducks still gathered for breadcrumbs, even though no one fed them anymore. We walked slowly, Ethan kicking fallen leaves ahead of us, Mark's hand brushing mine until our fingers linked naturally, no hesitation. We didn't talk about Emily. She'd reached out twice in the past year. Once through my mother with a handwritten letter I'd read and set aside without replying. Once a brief text apologizing again that I'd acknowledged with a simple, "I heard you." But her absence no longer felt like an open wound, just a closed chapter we weren't ready to reopen. As the sun dipped lower, painting the water gold, Ethan ran ahead to skip stones, while Mark and I sat on a bench we'd claimed years ago, the wood worn smooth by countless families. "Do you think we're okay?" I asked, not doubting, but needing to hear it spoken. He squeezed my hand. "We're better than okay. We're real. Scars and all." I leaned my head on his shoulder, felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and watched Ethan laugh as a stone skipped 4 times before sinking. The bond between us, the 3 of us, hadn't returned to some pristine original shape. It was thicker now, reinforced in the places it had cracked, flexible enough to bend without breaking. That evening, we ordered pizza, pepperoni for Ethan, veggie for us, ate it on the living room floor with a movie neither of us paid much attention to, and when Ethan finally went upstairs to text friends about his trip, Mark and I stayed on the couch, my legs across his lap, his hand resting on my knee. We didn't need grand declarations, the quiet commitment was enough. The way he stayed when things got hard, the way I reached for him instead of retreating, the shared knowledge that love, when it survives betrayal, isn't fairy tale perfect, but stubbornly, beautifully enduring. Outside the windows, the neighborhood lights came on one by one, street by street, and inside our house, the same soft glow held steady, scarred but stronger. A family remade not despite the past, but because of the courage it took to face it together, day after ordinary day, until the ordinary itself became the quiet miracle we'd been waiting for all along.